a good or bad experience? How do I create it so there's this feeling like, wow, this is going to be something? And I even want to create it for meetings. If it's a 1-hour meeting, I want that feeling. So I'll do a little bit of a thought ahead. How do I engage people so they're excited to go to the meeting? And then how do I, in the meeting, engage them so they feel like they're part of the journey? And that's always in the back of my mind.
Right, okay. So Andy, when it comes to priming, when you read this chapter, I mean, I think the readers, they get what it is. It's pretty obvious what priming is. How do you know that whether you're doing it right or wrong, that you're using it in a constructive way and not a destructive way?
I mean, the best way to know is from the reaction of the other. So if you had a desire, for instance, to have a meeting or have an event, and you tried to prime and people come and you don't feel like they're coming into this in a way that you would have liked them to be enthusiastic, excited, curious, then you could probably reevaluate how you primed it, how you got them prepared for that experience.
Right. I mean, it seems like in a certain way, though, it borders on manipulation.
Yeah, it is a bit of manipulation, right? I mean, again, you say manipulation, I'd rather use the word influence. So I'm influencing their mental state before we engage in an event or even a talk.
Right. So can you give us just some examples of where this went bad?
I mean,
or you've used it, or you've seen other people use it where it just went really bad.
Yeah, well, I'll use one for me because, of course, I'll be victim of my own, inadequacies at times. And more recently, I was renting an apartment to 2 young boys, and they happened to destroy my apartment. and it was one of these moments where I love these two. We were actually quite close, and I'm in the apartment, and I just sort of look and say, okay, well, there's quite a bit of damage, and so there's that, and so I was pointing out objectively, and I said, I'll come back to them with what the cost will be. And since I was just observing and not necessarily saying, dude, the sofa was brand new, how could you do that? Which I'm feeling inside, but I'm like, okay, he's gonna have to pay for it. So, but what I neglected was that, and not pointing out really the damage that was done, I wasn't giving him a chance to say, be prepared for when it came back. So listen, basically, you'll lose the deposit because you destroyed more than the deposit. So he was shocked because he wasn't primed. So it's like, how did this go? I'm having a talk with you. We're having a nice interaction. You're pointing this stuff out. The next thing I know, you're like, hey, you don't get any deposit back. So he was shocked, and I realized that I didn't take responsibility in terms of priming that difficult discussion afterwards. So we connected again, and we're actually, again, strangely, even in situations like that, I find connection. So loving remarks back and forth, and we found a way to make it work for both of us. But I didn't prime well. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because obviously priming has, there's some obvious cases, like imagine being a boss and you walk past an employee on a Wednesday and go, I can talk to you about something on Friday. Can I see you in the office Friday morning? Just pop on in.
Yeah.
And then for the next 2 days, the employee's like, oh my gosh, what's going to go on? He asked me to see you in the office. And you were thinking, I'm going to give him a raise, and I wanted to give him a promotion, see if he's interested or she's interested in a promotion. But they're like, oh my gosh, am I going to be fired? What did I do wrong?
Yeah.
And the rumination that created, because they filled the space with their own idea, it's definitely going to be there because people are going to find something. So giving them something that moves them in the right direction is important. And even I think we talked about when it's negative, like in your case, it's more important to give the prime so that they're more prepared and that conversation can go better.
Yeah.
How would you explain what you're doing here? Right? 'Cause I think you have a different way of looking at it than me.
Yeah. I like throwing parties, and when I throw a party, it's going to be good and memorable. So, like, I give you an example. So Ronnie and we have the same birthday, so I always add up both of our birthdays. And the last party we had was called 87 Shades of Red, and everyone knew 2 weeks in advance they got to wear red. Right, that was the theme of that party. So I know 2 weeks ahead, I'm already getting their mind sort of, wow, this is going to be something special. Because if it's just a party, then they don't have to get a pair of clothes, they don't have to think there's something unique. And then of course, you come to the house, everything is red. And in this case, we don't not only share the same birthday, we share the same wedding day. So, I use that opportunity to make a massive box in this room. And then I had the same woman who gave us our matrimonial vows 5 years ago. I shoved her in a box. Ronnie didn't know, and then Ronnie walked in and opened the box, and she popped out. So the kind of the idea is, I am setting this event up, priming. So there's almost this feeling of excitement continually building, and I do it intuitively, but I do it very intentionally, and I know that it's the kind of party you leave at 2 a.m. because you're just like, where did the time go? Everything. And that's kind of how I view everything in my life. Like, how do I create, it doesn't, a good or bad experience, how do I create it so there's this feeling like, wow, this is going to be something. And I even want to create it for meetings. If it's a 1-hour meeting, I want that feeling. So I'll do a little bit of a thought ahead. How do I engage people so they're excited to go to the meeting? And then how do I, in the meeting, engage them so they feel like they're part of the journey? And that's always in the back of my mind.
Right, okay. And I guess for me, I'm looking at it more of, if I gotta fire somebody, or it's more the negative thing where I need to bring negative information forward.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, the person's going to be triggered from this information.
Yeah.
How do I prepare them for that trigger so it's not as much of a slap in the face or not as much of a shot in the stomach? And by priming them properly, you can walk them into the thing that you're going to have to walk them into with the least pain out of it, because there's likely to be triggering, there's likely to maybe be some suffering, some rumination. So I kind of see it as a way of trigger management for the other person in that, which is slightly different, maybe more pessimistic, more not so positive, but when we look at the triggers, and that also gives me a process.
Yeah.
Because of course there's 5 triggers. I can just think to myself, am I going to push one of these in this person with that knowledge and relationship, and how can I prepare them for that?
That's a complex question, because I wouldn't necessarily want to prime them the day before, because in a way now they have to sit with that all night and let that anxiety, and they might not even show up to work, because if they think, oh, he's going to fire me, I'm going to delay or take some evasive action. So it's very much a case by case.
Sure.
So if I'm very close with somebody and it's not going well, then I'll prime them pretty much a few times, through, and say, listen, this isn't going well. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to end up. And then let them sit with that 2 weeks prior, and then say, hey, I don't see things changing. I don't know if it's really gonna happen unless we can make some shifts here. So in ways, there might have been 3 or 4 primes before we get to the final discussion where we say, hey, this just isn't working.
Right, and that has to do with timing of the priming.
Yeah.
So if I've done a poor job in priming them all along,
they'll be shocked.
Then they'll be shocked. So if I'm going to fire them on a Friday and I only let them know on Wednesday that that's going to happen, that's bad priming on my part, because I should have, through performance evaluations, through other things, given them some suggestions so that when that end point comes, there's no surprise. Yeah. But the priming has reduced that trigger all through the process. It wasn't a shock. And that's kind of how I see the use of priming. But you're right, there's a timing aspect to that based upon the gravity of the situation, right? And you can't do that with everything. There's some shocking things that happen, and you're like, okay, I need to still guide them in this, understand it's going to be a trigger, and do my best to reduce it. And priming is just a tool for that.
Just a tool. And I ran into this situation, I guess 4 days ago, where there were 2 parties that weren't getting along, and they were going to be separating. And for me, the goal was, how do we make sure to hold space so everyone gets to be part of this process and no one feels unseen, unappreciated? It's more one of those moments when you're like, hey, I love you, but it just isn't going to work. And so that's what it turned into. It was everyone sharing gratitude. It was kind of, everyone cried, it was a very emotional setting. And that was only possible because there was observation of what wasn't working without blame. Right. And so, that priming, making it impersonal again, so not blaming anyone, that creates a lot of space. Yeah.
Great. Can you talk a little bit just about the exercise that you're having and what you hope people get out of it, and how they can use this? This
exercise is really just kind of toying with people's minds, saying, wow, how are the many ways you can prime? So before you do anything, there's so many different ways you can prime that this gives you a lot of examples of how you can prime, and the answer is always all of the above. So it's just a simple, playful exercise. Some exercises are a bit more intense, others are a bit lighter. This is on the lighter side. And this is just whatever you're doing that's preparing people for an experience they're going to have is priming. And this just gives several examples in different experiences.
That's true. There's a lot of different ways you can prime somebody for something.
Yeah.
Finding the right one takes some practice.
That takes some practice, yeah.
Great. Thank you.